Kobbie Mainoo. Kobbie Mainoo. Kobbie Mainoo.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast, otherwise known as the Kobbie Mainoo Appreciation Podcast. I'm joined by my colleague Samuel Luckhurst and we're recording an early edition of the podcast today. It's actually going to be on a Wednesday afternoon, this one. We're recording ahead of the weekend's game against Brentford on Saturday night, of course. So we don't have the team news for that game, as we'll get into a bit later, but we're going to discuss Mainoo's performance for England. Been a fantastic few months for the youngster. Get into a few transfer bits, perhaps look at European qualification, what that might mean, and then, as I said, at the back end of the podcast, look ahead to the Brentford game. But first of all, Samuel Luckhurst, we're back together. How are you doing?
Happy to be back with you, Stephen. Very happy.
I mean, the fun doesn't stop. You've got to share coffers, unfortunately, on Saturday down to Brentford, the long haul. And then we've got a trip to Chelsea.
Day, yeah.
So yeah, we've got a lot of hours together ahead in the next week or so. Mainoo then, Samuel, as I said, we can call it the Mainoo Appreciation Podcast. We've waxed lyrical about him over the last 4 months. It's been a meteoric rise. He's gone from strength to strength. He obviously made his debut on Saturday night, was it, against Brazil, a cameo off the bench, and then made his full debut against Belgium at Wembley. I think naively, I said on the podcast with Tyrone earlier in the week, I kind of expected him to maybe get a cameo, get a little chance, but Southgate started him. Ty suggested that might happen, and he was brilliant.
I know. Well, I was rhapsodising about him to George on Monday's podcast, and I'm going to rhapsodise about him again in today's podcast. He's 18, which is scary because he doesn't play like an 18-year-old. He's conducting games. His telepathy with teammates that he hasn't played with before. I thought the build up to the penalty that England got against Belgium was excellent. The play, not just from Mainoo but Bellingham as well, and then Tony did very well to. I think to say he drew the foul would be a bit harsh on him. It was a foul by Vertonghen. He got his body in the right way, but given that would have been the first time those three would have ever started a game together, I think it was very encouraging for England that midfield looked so balanced, and I'm struggling to recall in my lifetime an England midfield three ever looking that balanced. I mean, they obviously had there was a bit of a heyday, I suppose you could say, or a hay month during Euro '96, where Terry Venables did a good job in terms of balancing out the midfield with Paul Ince in there. Jamie Redknapp, it was even pretty important when they beat Scotland. But when you look at Rice, Bellingham, and Mainoo, and it's got to be a wrench for United fans that should have been a United midfield, but it's pretty good going that they've got one of them, and they've developed that pocket dynamo as well. And it's just the way he changes. He can change pace, he can change direction. Looking back at the move that results in the penalty, it looks like he's just going to be quite content with keeping the ball. Then he does a shimmy, a shift, and he plays a forward pass. And it just completely changes the way England are playing in a second. And then it's another forward pass later, and then they've got a penalty. And there have not been many England midfielders that have had the ability to do that. And I thought Southgate summarised it very well last night when he said that he's a different profile of midfielder that they have. Because you go back to the Euros final, and it was two holding midfielders, and they had a back three as well. I remember Nigel de Jong saying at the time, because he was analysing for ITV, and he said that they didn't need that because there was a deep midfielder going to get the ball off one of the defenders, and they had three central defenders, and so it's too lopsided towards your own end when you want to be keeping the ball up the other end. And England have started to make that transition. I think that was quite clear at the World Cup. And now it's about taking it on another level, and hopefully for them, not only getting to another final, but actually winning a final. And I don't think it's a debate anymore. I think maybe before the Belgium game, the debate with Mainoo, it wasn't whether he should be in the squad. It's should he be in the team. You look at the way he played last night, and okay, it's a friendly, but Belgium have, although they didn't have their strongest side out, they had some good players out. I thought Amadou Onana was very good. Yuri Tielemans scored two really good goals. Those two are midfielders that Mainoo was pitted against. Other good players in that team as well. And Belgium have had very good pedigree at most international tournaments recently, by and large, apart from the last World Cup. And you can't. I think only a real killjoy, would be trying to trying to temper enthusiasm around Mainoo, because there's every chance that England will have easier games at the Euros, because it's easy to get out of the group where you can finish third and still go into the last 16. The pace of the Euros is going to be a lot slower than the Premier League, and fortunately, I've not read anything about his inexperience or his rawness, because it's moot. He's played brilliantly home and away against Liverpool. He's played brilliantly at all these away grounds, which have been in quite testing environments for different reasons, whether it's going to Goodison Park, which was pretty raucous, going to Molineux, where United threatened to snatch a draw from the clutches of victory until he pops up with that goal of the month. Kenilworth Road was a very different environment, very different atmosphere as well. And he was possibly the best player in the park that day. Villa Park, United did not have a lot of control of the ball in that game, but he was one player who always looked in control when he had the ball. So I don't think inexperience or rawness even comes into it. And we've seen before at major tournaments with England that young players can make a name for themselves, having not played a great deal of football going into it, whether it was Michael Owen at France 98, Wayne Rooney at Portugal for the Euro 2004. Paul Gascoigne, I suppose, would have had a bit more playing time when he played at Italia 90 and England reached the semi-finals. And I'm sure I've overlooked one or two other examples as well. But that's what you've got to. Sometimes you've got to embrace that. And he's coming from he's gone to the England setup from a club who absolutely embraced the concept of, if you're good enough, you're old enough. Age is irrelevant if you've got the capabilities and the characteristics and the quality to make a difference to the team. And you look at Kobby Mainoo, and he's made a huge difference to United this season. And the one pity about his season is that he missed the first 3 months of it. So I think if he hadn't, I don't see how United would not have been higher up in the table. I think it's a near certainty they'd have been in a better position than they currently are in.
The whole conversation has been, regarding Mainoo in England, is whether he had an outside chance of making that squad for the Euros. But now, Samuel, after just a few weeks, obviously the international break swung around in those two kind of cameos performances. Can he start? Can he start in Germany? And he looks well at home among those players. As you say, it was a brilliant display again. I think for me, we've always talked about his personality and the kind of lad he is. He's very humble, keeps his feet on the ground, and he's just so composed. And that actually translates to the pitch, doesn't it? You can see it when he's got the ball at his feet. And he just kind of, when he gets in those pockets and he works his way out with the ball, it's magic. His feet are brilliant. You saw that against Liverpool, that little run the left wing when he skipped past a few players. It's a great skill to have. So do you think he'll start for England in the summer then, Samuel? Because that is the conversation now. Because the way he's playing, as you said, Gareth Southgate has said himself, he offers something that other midfielders just don't. And there is that gap there, that number 8 position. And it looks like it has Mainoo's name written all over it.
And look, because of the dynamic of the group, where, as I said, you can finish, I don't think England will either, but you can finish third and still progress to the knockouts. There's every chance England will be able to play a quite heavily rotated team in the final game, or give players a breather. Southgate has already spoken about that in regards to Luke Shaw, because he said that he doesn't think he would be able to play 7 games within a month. I mean, Luke Shaw was struggling to play 7 games within the season with United. Unfortunately, he's been so brittle. But of course, where England have got a dearth of options at left back, and Ben Chilwell's had a couple of underwhelming performances, to put it politely, that's why Shaw has to be in consideration there. And if he's eased into the tournament, then so be it. I think Shaw was eased into the tournament for the last Euros. In fact, I'm not sure he even started in the first couple of games. I'm pretty sure he didn't start the first game, and there was a bit of confusion at that, because he'd had such a good season with United, and of course he ended that tournament as one of the best left backs, arguably the best left back. I think it was Spinazzola who got into the team of the tournament, but he snapped his Achilles in the quarterfinals. Yes, yeah, he was, absolutely. And there is scope there that you don't have to overplay a player. And also, I think from Southgate's perspective, if he's being selfish about it, which he should be, because if you're an England manager, you've got a month where you need to maximise the brilliance of the talent pool that you've got there. Mainoo did miss the first 3 months of the season. And of course, he's played a lot of football recently, but he's not played as much football as other players. And I think the only real danger to him is the amount of times he seemed to get kicked last night. I think that's going to probably become a growing trend now, where he is so fleet of foot. He can dribble past players. He is so dynamic on the ball, whether he's dribbling with it, whether he's passing, and that players will start to cynically foul him. I think it was Castagna who might have done it last night and somehow didn't get booked for it, when it was a very obvious yellow card, in my opinion. But as I said, where he had, between July and August, he played in the EFL Trophy, which you were at Salford. Unbeknownst to many, he actually played a few times, or 2 or 3 times, for the England under-19s in November. And he might have played in the Youth League as well. I think he had an outing in that. But apart from that, he didn't play any competitive first-team football. And it's only been in the last 4 months where he's played regularly. And, of course, it started with that game against Everton, which must have been nearly, maybe, in fact, I think it might have been 4 months ago, yesterday exactly. So just in that 4-month period, it writes itself, really, doesn't it? 4 months on from your full Premier League debut, he makes his full England debut. And I don't see another midfielder in the country who should be starting ahead of him. Bellingham and Rice were always givens. Bellingham's one of the best players in the world, possibly the best player in the world at the moment. Rice has been one of the best players in the Premier League this season. He's got the experience already of being a regular at 2 tournaments for England. The alternatives, Calvin Phillips is not an alternative at the moment. He's not even in the squad. I don't think you can even look at Jordan Henderson as an option. I really don't think he should have. I don't think he should be in the England squad anymore anyway, but I think that his days might be numbered now. And Conor Gallagher, I think he's a pretty good Premier League player. I don't think he's necessarily should be a certain starter every week for Chelsea, but when he has been starting for Chelsea, he's been playing higher up the pitch, so adjusting to a different role with England. I think he was always almost, I guess he was kind of destined to fail against Brazil, even though there was a lot of downbeat chatter about Brazil going into that game at the weekend, where they'd lost 3 games on the spin. But when he came up against Guimarães and Paqueta, who objectively are just better midfielders than him, he kind of fell by the wayside. And look, this has been a rarity. These March internationals, I'm struggling to recall the last time I watched 2 England friendlies, pretty much from start to finish in March. But the main reason why I did was because that Kobby Mainoo was likely to play in one and was going to start in the other. So it's actually been more exciting watching England with quite a heavily rotated team because of the injuries, and being able to experiment with some of the players. Some of them don't look cut out for it for the Euros. I think Lewis Dunk is one of those, unfortunately for him. Good Premier League defender though he is, he doesn't look like he's on it at international level. Ivan Toney would certainly be in my 23-man squad. It would be a bit harsh on Ollie Watkins, but I think Toney's got more about him as a striker, and encouragingly as well, he linked up very well with Bellingham and Mainoo last night. And as I said to you before we came on, England are at the point now where they've got the players where they have to be taking games to opponents, and they did do that against France, in fairness, in the World Cup quarter-final, which was quite an unfortunate defeat. There were various issues regarding the game management of that game from Southgate, but it was seen as a palatable exit from the tournament, and I don't think many people would have expected that going into the tournament, because the approval ratings for Southgate at that time were not great. I thought the reaction to the friendly against Hungary, which was June 2022, I thought that was overblown. As bad a result as it was a friendly. Players were knackered after a long season, and so that did distort the perception of Southgate. And then come the end of it, even though they'd technically taken a step back in going out of the quarterfinals, having reached a final at the Euros and the semi-finals at the previous World Cup, the consensus was, look, England should continue with him, and he is starting to embrace a more front-footed approach, and he can't not do that, because you look at the players in that squad, and it really would be a waste if you're playing Conor Gallagher ahead of Kobby Mainoo, if you weren't accommodating Phil Foden and Jude Bellingham in the same side. England will have a very, very good 11, starting 11, who don't go to the Euros this summer. Marcus Rashford didn't even come on last night, and I think he might be shifting a little bit nervously now, given the options that Southgate has got to play on the left wing. But Kobby Mainoo, he's got to have his plane ticket booked as far as I'm concerned.
What do you think the biggest challenges for Mainoo are then in the next few months? Because there's always this kind of narrative when a young player comes onto the scene, and it's been, well deserved, to be fair, but we're obviously part of this. When we're analysing all of his performances, we're praising him so much, and there's a lot of noise around a young lad, basically, isn't it? When you look at his personality, he's very prepared for it, and he's got all the right people around him, and he's at the right place for it at the biggest club in England. But it is going to be a bit difficult, isn't it, surely, in that regard, Samuel? Because the next few years, the attention's just going to increase. I saw an article the other day that suggested he was already going to get a deal with Nando's or something like that, Mainoo. The hype is going to just pick up, and you look at players who have gone by the wayside. Maybe that's a bit disrespectful, but Adnan Januzaj, for example, who had a huge kind of hype around him as well, and he burst onto the scene. Is that a fair comparison? And could you see that being a challenge for Mainoo going forward?
It's a challenge, but I don't have any doubt that it'll be a challenge he comes through. He's got very good people around him in terms of his family. Things like still living at home with his parents, who I think are separated, but he
lives with his mother.
This is between them. His dad still has a watchful eye over his development, and from what I was told last season, he's not afraid to tell the coach at United, if some tough love is needed, then give it, which is probably a rarity among young footballers now, but sometimes that is needed, and it's clearly constructive. And he's still parking in the normal car park at Carrington rather than the first team car park, which is quite endearing. And just the way he conducts himself, he's not spoken a great deal, which is a pity, and I'm sure it will come in time. I know I think he turns 19 next week, or certainly sometime in April.
End of April, yeah.
But I don't think that. The fact that England put him up to speak to members of the media after his call up last week, that shows you the level of trust they have in him, and he just comes across as a thoroughly likeable lad. And
he doesn't come across as an 18-year-old, does he? That's the thing. It's similar with Jude Bellingham when he spoke when he was 17, but Mainoo's just so mature.
Yeah, and speaking to someone at United, they say that he's, in terms of players they've encountered at that age at the club, he is by far and away the most level-headed that they've come across. And sometimes you can come across a kid who is full of bravado, and that isn't always necessarily a bad thing. You watch the way Garnacho played during the Youth Cup run. He believed the hype in him, and if you believe the hype in yourself, you've got to back it up, and he has backed it up. His character is part of what makes him such a brilliant player. And Mainoo is a different character, and that's what makes him such a brilliant player. You don't want an 11 full of a starting 11 of players that have exactly the same personalities. You want diverse personalities and players coming from different backgrounds and different cultures. I think that can only be a strength for a team. And I've not seen a hint that would suggest that Mainoo is going to be a problem. I remember about 8 years ago when I don't know if Periscope even still exists, but back then there were some United youngsters who were on it like in car parks late at night, and you'd see it and you just think, what the hell are you doing? And also, have United got someone who's keeping tabs on these lads doing daft things? And they weren't doing anything remotely harmful, but why is a professional footballer who is essentially is quite often rubbing shoulders with the first team players at Carrington, why would you put yourself in that position? Why wouldn't you just keep your head down, not act as daft as you are? There's only so much that the people at United can do in terms of, like, it's not like they're ever going to ban use of social media, because that would be far too draconian. You've got to allow kids to breathe and express themselves, but make them aware of the dangers out there and certain rabbit holes that you don't want to venture down as well. And I mean, there's even an article in the Times today about the cyberbullying that children barely out of primary school are subjected to, and it's extremely stark to say the least. And as bad as it is at that age, you can imagine it gets a little bit worse. Sadly, the older they get. But if you're well grounded, if you've got the right people giving you the guidance, the advice, if you're in the right environment and you're allowed to thrive, then you're bound to do well. And I think United's academy, I mean, the other reason why we're talking so much at length about them is because the academy is a consistent success story, and that's been the case even during the doldrum spells, I suppose, if you want to call it, if you want to put it that way. Since Sir Alex Ferguson retired, every year there has been some kind of academy legacy, and that player may have only lasted a year or 2 years in the United first team, but like just plucking a name out of thin air, Paddy McNair starting for Northern Ireland again last night. He must have dozens of caps at international level. He's having a good career with Middlesbrough in the Championship, and then you've got lads like Mainoo and Garnacho who've done fabulously. Januzaj was a success story for the season. He has fallen by the wayside a bit, and he's not fulfilled the potential that he showed at United, but he still played and scored at a World Cup, played in Spain, played in Italy. He's not done too badly for himself, but it is a shame that he didn't reach the heights that he should have done. But that these are players that have developed in the post-Ferguson era, and there've been plenty of others as well. So, going back to the challenges Mainoo faces, I just think that he's got a good manager who has taken him under his wing quite early on, and I think that what didn't go unnoticed last night as well was that when he started at Wembley, it would have been 13 months ago that Ten Hag made a beeline for him after the League Cup final, and just spent about 15 seconds just chatting to him, and Mainoo's smiling and nodding, and you don't really need a lip reader. You know the gist of what Ten Hag was saying to him. It's essentially saying, keep going, stay on the right track, and this, you'll be able to be involved in this one day. And he's now starting at Wembley for England, and next month he'll be starting for United at Wembley against Coventry.
They need to build a midfielder around him for the next 10 years, don't they? You could probably apply that comment to England as well. Yeah. To end the first segment then on the Kobbie Mainoo Appreciation Podcast, we've got a nice little treat because Samuel has dug out a little audio clip of how to pronounce Kobby Mainoo's name that United provided a while back. For anyone who doesn't know, I mean, we've said it multiple times on this podcast, but it's Kobbie, like Robbie, Mainoo. And I'll just let our producer put in the clip right now.
Kobbie Mainoo. Kobbie Mainoo. Kobbie Mainoo. Kobbie Mainoo.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, we're going to discuss the Champions League next season, as orders from our producer have told us to do, because it's going to change the competition. I'm sure you're excited to hear. And now I'll first get your verdict on the changes, because personally I love the Champions League current format. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's produced some amazing games, drama, last-minute goals, some fantastic matches.
Are we about to talk about a competition that United might not be in
next
season?
That's what I was also about to say over the last few years. However, ironically, we're about to delve into this. We still don't know if Manchester United will be in that competition next season. Are you for or against the rules if United qualify?
The rules, what rules?
Well, so they've changed now. Obviously, it used to be the current format
changed.
The current format is obviously the groups. I think it's 8 groups of 4, but they're increasing it now. And it's basically going to be a league table, and you're drawing against different teams. I don't think the rules needed changed. As I've said, the games were kind of doing them. This season has been poor, to be fair, hasn't it? When you look at the first group matches coming out of the group stages, the knockout matches.
United's group wasn't. United's group was pretty. Like if you were watching
the knockout games, like Manchester City had Copenhagen, for example. Bayern Munich had Lazio.
The payoff of that is that you've got 4 brilliant quarterfinals. Yeah. I completely agree that the round of 16 was so underwhelming that I thought, crikey, am I actually going to bother watching any of these games? In the end, I did, and I don't think... Yeah, the only 2 games I watched didn't involve English clubs. I watched Bayern Munich's second leg against Lazio, which was quite watchable, and RB Leipzig were very impressive against Real Madrid in the second leg when they were very close to taking it to extra time. So there were some worthwhile games in the end, but on paper they weren't games that were going to attract an audience. But I think the format change is crap. It's pointless. I think the format has been fine for... I think it's settled on that format of group stage and then into the last 16 in what it would have been 2003-04. So that's been going for 20 years. All of a sudden, there's a UEFA presidential change, and really, Alexander Ceferin should have shown a bit more respect to English club supporters who staved off the threat of the Super League. I remember after the Super League was kiboshed, I think it was Ilkay Gundogan who came out with a tweet and said, "Look, essentially, I'm glad that that's been put to bed, but now can we discuss this ludicrous concept of having more games in the Champions League when we've got all these international games and the calendar is already so packed as it is." It's that I'm usually not one of these who looks to the excuse of tiredness, but clearly since the pandemic, there has been. It feels like there's still a backlog of games that we're dealing with, and there's no real respite. This summer, there's a Euros and a Copa America, which there are always going to be, but 18 months ago, not even 18 months ago, there was a World Cup, which was one of the worst decisions in the history of football. One, that it was awarded to Qatar, who should never have hosted the World Cup. Secondly, it was a Winter World Cup. And so last season, you've got players playing... I mean, Bruno Fernandes probably played in more than 70 games last season.
I think it was 60. It was 68.
Yeah, so he probably played what... Yeah, because United had 62 games last season and Portugal had 5 games at the World Cup, maybe 1 or 2 friendlies, and he wouldn't have started all those games. So yeah, it would have probably just clocked in under 70, which is still an obscene amount of playing time over the course of a season. And we're seeing it even now with England, the amount of injuries they've had to contend with over the last fortnight. And that is partly a consequence of the schedule. And I know United have had it differently recently because they've had a lot of free midweeks where they've not been playing in Europe, and there are reasons beyond the calendar which have contributed to players getting injured. As you said the other week, in terms of the intensity in training, that is an issue that a lot of players have, whether they flagged it with Ten Hag, but they flagged it with confidence, certainly, and it's been reported. They feel it's too intense, and it's a balancing act, because I remember listening to that brilliant podcast that the BBC produced on Everton last season, and when Sean Dyche came in and replaced Frank Lampard, they highlighted that Dyche ordered the players to wear shin pads in training. Now, at the time, if you're an Everton fan, you're probably thinking, good on him. It was clearly far too relaxed under Lampard. He wasn't intense enough. If now you can imagine Everton players thinking it's too intense in training. We've not won a game in 4 months or 3 months, however long it's been. We're struggling in the league. We need to be a bit more relaxed and then be more intense at the weekend. It's managing that balancing act. If we were reporting about the intensity of United's training at the start of Ten Hag's tenure, let's face it, he took them on that run the day after Brentford in 30-degree heat. The consensus among supporters was good. They deserve it after not running enough the previous day and getting thrashed 4-0. But there is a balancing act that a lot of managers having to contend with, and there is an overload on players. I mean, the main reason why Raphael Varane retired from France duty was that he couldn't manage the balancing act anymore. He had to go with one or the other, and it has to be your club, because your club pay your wages, and you're not going to be able to get in your national team if you're not playing for a club. So a lot of players are having issues with it, and is there an end in sight? It doesn't look like there will be. The other issue that English clubs have got is the League Cup. It's the only one of the 5 big leagues that has still got a League Cup competition. And I mean, the fact that there are still two-legged semi-finals, I mean, that should be scrapped. FA Cup replays, I would always protect FA Cup replays if it's a non-league club and they somehow get a draw against a Premier League club. They should be getting a replay. That it shouldn't be going to extra time. If it's two Premier League clubs against each other, there is no point in having a replay. I agree with that. If you can put it to a vote to the Championship clubs, I'd argue, would they want replays if they drew a Premier League club or if they drew a fellow Championship club? Because I imagine quite a lot of them would probably say no. We've come to the point this season in the FA Cup where Reading fielded a shadow side against, was it Eastleigh or Ebbsfleet, I think, and went out. So you've got third-tier teams essentially tossing off the FA Cup. And that will have been partly because of the fixtures and to prioritise their league programme as well. So I think there's a lot that can be done to actually ease the calendar. And instead, UEFA have gone in the opposite direction. And they already did it in 2016 by expanding the Euros to 24 teams, which again, they've got a bit lucky with it because Euro 2016 was not a good tournament, but it had good stories. And the good stories were Wales, who got to the semi-finals in their first tournament since 1958, and of course Iceland, who got to the quarterfinals by beating England in the round of 16. But the quality of that tournament was pretty poor. And when the Euros was a 16-team tournament, it was the best international tournament in the world by far because it was cutthroat from the word go. And the group, like every group, pretty much was a group of death. You always knew there were going to be some really big nations that weren't going to get to the quarterfinals. But of course, UEFA just want more games because more games means more money. And there's no real consideration for, if you like, the brand of football that you're going to get, because sometimes it is going to fail. And they're obviously going to do it with the World Cup as well. They're expanding that, even though the format for that is absolutely fine. It's perfect. It doesn't need changing, but it's no, let's invite some more nations. And the more nations you invite, the worse the competition becomes because the quality is diluted. But as I said, they've got lucky with some very good stories in recent years. At the last World Cup, Morocco was a great story with them getting to the semi-finals. Croatia have been a great story at the last two World Cups, getting to the final and the semi-finals in 2022. The final between Argentina and France was probably the greatest ever World Cup final. And of course, you have that clown Infantino who comes out and says this has been the greatest World Cup ever. And people in Qatari stooges feel emboldened and think, yes, Qatar have put on a great show. You could have put that show in Timbuktu and the tournament would have still been brilliant. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were playing in Qatar. Qatar were just lucky to host it. And I suppose it helped as well that it was it was early in the season, so players didn't feel as knackered as they can do at the end of the season, where tiredness is a little bit more apparent and it can affect their performance level more. Where I've just said that, there's the danger, I suppose, I'm advocating another Winter World Cup, which I fear will probably happen if it goes to Saudi Arabia. But I just think there are too many games. I mean, we said, I remember this during the COVID season in 2021, where literally every Premier League game was televised, and some friends were saying there's actually too much football on. It was becoming a bit of a turn off. And when the internationals came along, I think everybody was glad that there was some breathing space there at the time, because there had just been too much of it. And I think that is the day.
They had the 12 o'clock game, and then it was the 3 p.m. game, 5:30, and the 8 o'clock game televised, which was, looking back, it's insane. It's far too much, isn't it? It's fatigue.
It sounds great in essence, but you want that during a World Cup or a Euros.
Yeah, early Watford at 8 p.m. after a game of 3 fixtures isn't the most exciting fixture to watch, is it?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I mean, this new competition, Samuel, will be 36 teams, and as you said, just watering them down really is just going to be, you'd expect, not as good quality, and it just takes away, surely, the meaning champions from Champions League. Especially when fifth place in the Premier League could get, I know ironically United could benefit from this season, but when fifth place gets Champions League qualification, it takes away from the allure and the importance of it, surely.
I mean, if any United fan or any one of United fan of United persuasion, celebrated finishing fifth just because it got them into the Champions League, that they need their head examining. I think it's ridiculous. Fifth yesteryear, you were lucky to get in the UEFA Cup with that. I just think, again, it dilutes the competition. And in fairness, with the Premier League, because it is so competitive, and I think the quality, bar Sheffield United, who've been just laughably bad this season, and Burnley, who've been laughably naive, I think the competitiveness and the quality has been one of the best. So UEFA know that if they're getting 5 teams from the Premier League, that's good for them, because it means one more quality team from the best league in the world, or purportedly the best league in the world. Certainly, I think it's probably the highest quality league in the world. But it takes away the essence of the competition, and that was an on-running joke back in the 90s when it was obviously rebranded as the Champions League, but it was the second place team who aren't the champions, they can enter it. And then it was third. And I remember when Saturday Comes, one of the covers of it, essentially taking the mick out of Liverpool for finishing third in the Premier League table. And then it wasn't too many years after that you had Arsene Wenger saying that, well, fourth is like winning a trophy, which he was rightly, there was a lot of derision directed at him for saying that. But there was some rationale to it as well, because of the prize money and the revenue. It does make a big difference, and that's why it would make such a big difference if United are in it next season. But it's rubbish. I mean, the format is fine as it is, and as badly as United's group stage went, it was an enthralling group stage, and I think it always had the potential to be, with with partisan followers from Galatasaray, Copenhagen, and Bayern Munich, and it turned out that Copenhagen were a much better side than most people thought they were, and there was an air of unpredictability about Galatasaray as well, and it was certainly an unpredictable group from a United perspective.
Do you want to expand on the story you and Tyrone did then, Samuel, yesterday about multi-club ownership? Obviously, Sir Jim Ratcliffe does.
More bureaucracy.
Politics and football.
Yeah, I've just wasted about 10 minutes of my life. I think I did quite well talking for 10 minutes about
you did.
the competition.
I was actually really impressed. I know
it's gonna kill me next season when I'm working Thursday nights again in Bratislava or Chisinau, because I think it'd be my turn. Yes, I mean with the multi-club ownership, and this did come up when we spoke to Ratcliffe at the INEOS office last month. Technically, United cannot compete in the same competition or European competition as Nice, because Nice are owned by INEOS as well. When that was brought up to Ratcliffe, he stressed that they'd spoken to UEFA, and there would have to be adjustments made to ensure, I think it's like the diluting of shares or not sharing data. Brighton were in that position at the start of the season, and so were Aston Villa. I think Brighton is the Belgian club, isn't it? That they're under the same umbrella. I think it's Union Saint-Gilloise of Belgium, and Villa, their owners, also own Vitória in Portugal, and Vitória also qualified for European competition. And at the start before last season started, I think it was the UEFA Club Financial Control Body. They brought cases against those clubs because of the multi-club ownership rule they were in breach of. But those clubs then made the adjustments, submitted it to UEFA. UEFA said, fine, you can compete. And essentially that's what Ratcliffe and INEOS would do with Nice and with United. UEFA, speaking to someone from UEFA yesterday, they said, look, there's absolutely no appetite to kick any clubs out of Europe, and least of all the first English club that ever entered a UEFA competition back in 1956, who, unlike another club in Manchester, have clearly antagonised UEFA and have quite a fraught relationship with UEFA. And also, if UEFA were so adamant that United couldn't play in European competition this season, or they weren't satisfied with any adjustments that have been made by Ineos, then United would have the option to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and appeal it, and UEFA concede that United would probably win the judgment of that. So I don't think it's a concern for United. I mean, technically, they would have to be excluded if they are in the same, if they're in the Europa League and Nice are in the Europa League. I think the way it's going, there's a chance that both of them would go into that. But I think from the Champions League next season, the whole thing of dropping out of the Champions League into the Europa League, that ends. So if Nice are in the Champions League, which is still an outside chance, I think they're fifth in Liga, so they have tailed off, given that they were second for quite a while earlier in the season. It may sort itself out without Ineos having to adjust anything. But I mean, they were on top of it before their minority state was finally ratified in February. They'd already held discussions with UEFA, so they're pretty on the ball. They're ahead of the curve. I think it would have been a surprise if they hadn't. Broached that topic with UEFA before they took official control of the football operation. So United are confident that they'll be allowed to compete next season, despite this possible conflict of interest.
Samuel, I think you deserve a gold star after that segment. Well, maybe an Easter egg, actually. It's topical, isn't it? Ahead of Easter weekend. Very well done. A quick mention to my interview with World number 4 in the world at darts, Nathan Aspinall, which I believe has came out today. I interviewed him around a week and a half ago at the MEN headquarters. It should be a very enjoyable listen, so check that out. It's across on YouTube and your audio platforms. But Samuel, will be back to the football in part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester Is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, you and our producer were just chatting before we went on air about how much of the international break would have just been absolutely dreadful if United had lost to Liverpool in the FA Cup. Fortunately, it was a special extra time, really memorable performance, one of the best performances in a decade. That kind of half an hour was really special and magical. We were both there in the press box. But now, Samuel, they have to build on it. And that's always the troubling thing with United. They get these results. You think, right, come on, build some momentum. They've obviously got Brentford on Saturday night in the Premier League. Can they build on it?
Oh, they can, absolutely. If you thought they couldn't, then there'd be something wrong. But that win the other week, 10 days ago, whenever it was now, was uplifting. Doesn't cover it. It's as much as teams may strive to win a game as routinely, straightforwardly as possible. That feeling of scoring an added time winner is the best feeling in sport. I think it's a better feeling than. Unless you win the European Cup the way United did in '99, I don't think even winning a trophy is as good a feeling as that. Just that raw emotion and that the thrill of it, the excitement. I mean, you only have to. I saw it back, not at the time. It was when I watched the highlights of the game, but just that image of the 10-year-old boy who was in tears at Ahmad's winner and. That's what sport's all about. You couldn't help but find that such an endearing
The word
image.
limbs is used a lot, isn't it, in modern sport? Yeah. You see all these kind of clips of fans throwing themselves in chairs, but there was genuine limbs at Old Trafford in that game. I mean, it was amazing, the scenes. It was the loudest I've ever heard it anyways.
Yeah, I spoke to someone who wasn't in attendance, but their brother was, and he said that his brother was telling him that there were people around him crying at full time, in shedding tears of joy, and around us in the press box, which is quite a mild-mannered section. There were people hugging each other who I've never seen before hugging each other. Normally it's polite applause, but when you win a game and when you win like that against Liverpool and the season is effectively on the line as well, and you've gone through the ringer for 2 hours, I'm amazed that nobody invaded the pitch. Really, it would have been justified. I think if they'd maybe won that game like they did at Anfield, the stewards at Anfield would have struggled to keep the hardcore contingent in the Anfield Road end at bay. But it was an unforgettable day, and I think it will be a day. Like, had a message from a friend family friend who's been a season ticket holder for more than 50 years. And he said that they'll be talking about that for years to come. And you think of all the games and atmospheres he's experienced across half a century. And I think we all understood and knew the magnitude of the win and what a special occasion it was. And I said that before the game. I said, United Liverpool, it's not in the FA Cup. It's not just a fixture. It's not just a cup tie. It is an occasion. And United rose to the occasion, absolutely. And look,
having said that, Samuel, I mean, the first half an hour was brilliant. They really came out the blocks and seized the initiative. But in that second half, me and you kind of both turned to each other and said, "They're sleepwalking here." And they were sleepwalking to their feet. Obviously, Anthony's goal gave them some inspiration and a spark and the jolt into life. But if we see the first half an hour against Brentford, it's going to be really encouraging. You think they'll get a result. But if they perform like they did for most of that second half, they're probably going to struggle.
I was just about to get onto that. It wasn't a perfect performance. It was a very imperfect performance. It was very flawed. I think if they'd lost that game, then my piece might have focused on the chasm between the defenders and the midfielders was it the 32nd minute or 30-something minute where 5 of them were taken out of the game, and you just couldn't believe the yawning chasm between them. And Liverpool somehow didn't score, but that was a warning shot. And then Liverpool did score 2 goals not long after that. And for 40 minutes in the second half, United didn't lay a glove on them. Liverpool managed the game well to an extent, but they didn't get that 3rd goal. If they went 3-1 up in that game, I think United would have been dead and buried. And Liverpool even had a 5-on-2 at one point, I think it was, and somehow botched that. So that's why it was. I just felt pretty helpless in terms of trying to make head or tail of that game, because there were so many subplots to it. It was a Hollywood epic of a game. It was just, there was so much to take in, and the immediate thing you want to do after you've watched a film of epic proportions which has had a twist in it, is you want to rewatch it. But unfortunately, we have to do a write-up of it in between, and the fact that you were almost in danger of being late to the mix zone, which normally I didn't
actually tell you. I did miss the very start of Ahmad, but I kind of ran into the mix zone area, and United's member of communications usually looked at it. Obviously, one of our colleagues looked at it, but thankfully I got most of it. And then obviously Bruno Fernandes came out and spoke for 7 minutes as well. So
yeah, well, that's lesson learned then.
Yeah, exactly.
I mentioned you in my morning piece trying to make head or tail of what happened 10 days ago, and I said you made it on time, so I might have to amend.
I did actually run up the steps though into the mix zone. I did have to run.
I could see you walking. As you were like at the halfway line, I'd got a message from the United Press Office saying, "Is anyone in the mix zone?" And I'm thinking, "Oh Christ, this is the downside of witnessing one of the games of our lives." So I mean, we could probably just talk about that game until the cows come home. But as you said, they have had some big wins this season. I think Diogo Dalot came into the mix zone after the Brentford win in early October, and he said this is the turning point. And I don't think any of us really thought that was I don't think any of us, with all due respect to him, I don't think any of us really believed him at that point. It was an extraordinary finale, and it wasn't a turning point. They did win a couple of games afterwards, but their form didn't pick up. But when you win a game like they did against Liverpool, and especially at this stage of the season as well, where you're coming into the run-in now, and they're going to have 10 games in the league, at least 1 in the FA Cup. They want to be playing a dozen games now, and they've got to be aiming to win to win all of them. Really, that almost certainly will not happen. But as far as the league is concerned, when you see Villa wobbling, when you see Tottenham possibly bottling it again, that's got to give United some hope. The league situation doesn't look as ominous as it did after the back-to-back defeats to Fulham and Manchester City. So I said to someone who works at United before the Everton game, I said, look, if you win the Everton game and the Liverpool game, you go into the spring internationals with a spring in your step. And that turned out to be a hell of an understatement given the manner of the Liverpool win. But, I mean, we were... from a journalistic perspective, I think everyone who covers United, a little bit like, I remember Ty saying it after the Brentford win in October, because that preceded the internationals. And he said that, there's this misconception, this myth that, those who cover United want them to fail and they want to stick the knife in. but everyone was delighted that United won because it ensured that week, those 2 weeks, were not going to be anywhere near as busy as they would have been had they lost to Brentford. And regarding this stretch now, in the wake of the Liverpool game, I think everyone was delighted United won because it means there's a lot to go out for the run-in. There's going to be a trip.
It's the feel-good factor, isn't it? You'd much rather write about positive stories than bad news.
I know. Yeah, someone at United who they've been working there for nearly 5 years now. When I spoke to them first, they were in a bit of a sticky spell at the time after, I think it was the start of February 2020. Fernandes had just signed, but their form in January had been pretty poor. They'd lost 4 games and the situation, the state of play was not particularly good. And he said, you must be, negative news and everything. It must be doing well. And I said, no. I said, that is a complete myth. The audience on the MEN is always better when Manchester United are doing well, when things are going positively. And that continues to be the case, and that will always be the case. So, again, it's quite funny and reassuring when you see these rather ill-informed
the opposite is true.
Who I mean, I hesitate to call them Manchester United supporters because they're Elon Musk fans because they're paying Elon Musk to get their verified tick. I doubt they've ever actually paid to go and see Man United. And someone sent me something about this idiot tweeted to me, which I hadn't seen, and it was, you don't get to write any negative articles now, as if I'm sad at that. And it's like you think, well, Christ, that you're that dense, you don't know how it works or how we function as journalists, and how we're feeling as well. So that probably was an extra addition of satisfaction after the game that day.
Do you think the reverse fixture at Old Trafford's relevant there? I mean, you just mentioned it a few times, but Brentford were leading 1-0 for a lot of that game. Scott McTominay comes on from the bench. We all know what happened, 2 goals in quick succession. That was an unbelievable moment as well, to be fair. When you look back in the season, like McTominay at Brentford and obviously that Liverpool game will be high on the agenda to reflect on.
Mainoo at Wolves as well. Yeah.
Mainoo at Wolves. So there's been some really amazing last-minute goals. But Brentford were pretty good. You go back to the game at the Brentford Community Stadium, one of Ten Hag's first games in charge. I mean, that was a dreadful performance. So Brentford they've got form against United in recent years.
Well, the 4-0 last season, anything felt possible after that. You had Gary Neville speaking quite impassioned tones afterwards. 9 days later, you were outside the ground, weren't you, covering the protests ahead of the Liverpool game? And the atmosphere that night was really, really quite febrile. There was a lot of disenchantment with the direction of United after two bad defeats under the new manager, and the new manager wasn't copping it, and rightly so, because the problems went well beyond the manager. But that Brentford game, that was staggering. I've referred to it, and I'd still maintain it's the generational nadir for United. I mean, they've had worse defeats. Obviously, Liverpool have inflicted a 5-0 thrashing on them and a 7-0 thrashing on them. And as apocalyptic as those days were, and the 5-0 did ensure that Solskjaer was going to get sacked, albeit 4 weeks later. But that Brentford game, as I said, it just felt like on the car on the way back, we were discussing the possibility of United finishing in the bottom half of the table, because it didn't seem that didn't seem impossible. That seemed very possible, if not probable, at that point. But fortunately for United, that was used. I mean, Ten Hag's handling of the situation in the wake of that was expert. Like the players bought into the punishing run the next day. He settled on the team well in advance of that Monday night game against Liverpool. The 9-day gap between the games helped immensely, but he decided to drop the captain. He decided to drop Ronaldo, the talisman, made a couple of other changes, and United were brilliant against Liverpool, particularly in the first half. They absolutely overwhelmed them when they won, in which was Ten Hag's first victory in charge. And that night was memorable as well, and it was topped in the cup quarter-final recently. But those two victories against Liverpool that Ten Hag has had, they've really been the best wins he's achieved. And I know he would probably disagree. He would say no, it would be Newcastle in the League Cup final because it was a trophy. But really, in terms of like the sheer emotion and the noise level of the supporters getting behind a win, the two Liverpool wins and the Barcelona win in the Europa League knockout tie last season are the ones that are probably in the top three during Ten Hag's time at United. I mean, Brentford now were their slide has been kind of inevitable because after having such a brilliant season last season, I think it was always going to be impossible to build on that. And as good a job as...
Do you think the regression is kind of... Sorry for interrupting. It's kind of went under the radar a bit, though, because they are really struggling this season. Actually, obviously, Ivan Toney being unavailable has had a massive bearing on that. But I don't think until recently people actually realised how bad they were playing. They've picked up again recently since his return. They've had some okay results, but they've been playing very poorly.
Yeah, and I think they've missed Brian Mbeumo for a long period as well. I think he's a good player. He's a really good player. But when you're becoming the first team to lose at Turf Moor in the league this season, and I know that Thomas Frank was I think he said he was proud of the players afterwards because they were down to 10 men for the majority with Reguilon sent off so early on. But that's quite a galling result. And when you look at their form, they're, I think, just looking at it now, since going back to early December, there've been 3 wins, and those wins have come against Luton at home, Nottingham Forest at home, and I suppose this one was a bit of a surprise, Wolves away. So that's pretty dire to say the least. And the good fortune of clubs in that area, Brentford, Forest, Everton, is that there have been the only saving grace that there have been a couple of teams who were absolutely certain just to go straight back down, Sheffield United and Burnley. Fair play to Luton. I think they've made a really good fist of it this season. They'll probably still go down, I think, but they're out of the relegation zone at the moment due to Forest's points deduction. So I think there's a lot of goodwill towards Luton because of the novelty factor of Kenilworth Road hosting Premier League games, and I think the Tom Lockyer factor as well plays into it. It's almost a little bit patronising how much people are cherishing Luton's presence in the Premier League, but they have been a breath of fresh air, even though you don't really get a lot of fresh air down at Kenilworth Road. I can confirm, having left the ground to a very familiar stench that I hadn't smelt at a ground since probably going as a kid to games in the 90s.
Not even Anfield?
No.
That was a cheap joke. That was a cheap joke.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, you'll have the Echo submitting a complaint against you at this rate. But I can't remember the last time I actually watched Brentford in any depth. I mean, they did quite well. Watching the highlights against Chelsea, I suppose it was the Arsenal game where they put up a good fight against them, and of course they were undone by a winning goal by a player who shouldn't have been on the pitch because Kai Havertz should have got a second booking for diving. So they were quite unfortunate there. With United this season, they've very, very rarely won comfortably. Is it 5 or 6 times they've won by a margin of at least 2 goals? I would be pleasantly surprised if they did that this weekend. Brentford playing at home, Man United coming to town. They've played well against United in both home games they've had against them. Even when Rangnick took United there, Brentford battered them in the first half. I think Thomas Frank said afterwards, he said, we absolutely smashed Man United, but then they found themselves 3-0 down inside the first 15 or 20 minutes of the second half. So it was...
They'll be hugely up for the game, Samuel. I mean, when you look at the kickoff time,
will,
I always talk about kickoff times. I know it's such an obvious thing, but 8 p.m. Saturday night, and they have that kind of light show, don't they? I mean, it's pathetic. I hate it, but it seems to get their fans up for a match. So they are going to fancy their chances, and they will make it difficult for United.
It's a worse light show than the Wolves one. The Wolves one I've almost come to embrace, but I'm not too sure they even bother it anymore. But they are. I dislike them as much as I probably dislike goal music more. But they are. They're very, very manufactured, and I think Brentford come out to Hey Jude as well, which is a great song, but it is way overused by quite a few Premier League clubs as entrance music. That said, I completely agree with you. The kickoff times. I mean, the kickoff time this weekend is an absolute disgrace that the Premier League have got away with an 8 p.m. kickoff time on Easter Saturday, with fans coming down from Manchester and a few reporters coming down from Manchester as well. So yeah, I'm sure people have got their violins out for us, but it is for match goers. It's dreadful. As I just said, it's a disgrace. I think the rights holders who are hosting this game, they should, if you're Erik ten Hag, you should be having a pop at them during your pre-match interview and your post-match interview as well. A bit like when Solskjaer, I think it was Jurgen Klopp, wasn't it? That time with Des Kelly, he said about the kickoff time. It really is a crime, and I think the payoff of that has been that, okay, we won't give you a 12:30 game, but we'll give you a really late game instead, and that's been the compromise. But usually they happen for teams who've had a European game in midweek, and of course teams are coming off the back of the internationals. So why the hell there's an 8 p.m. kickoff this weekend? I don't know, and it's Sky Sports who are showing it, not TNT's. As I said, I think TNT normally show those 8 p.m. games that feature a team that have been playing in Europe in midweek, but it's an absolute. I know that it's Easter weekend, and they think, well, let's have as much football as possible, but. Why couldn't Aston Villa Wolves be at 8 o'clock? That's at 5:30. What other games are there on Saturday?
I think Newcastle West Ham's the early kickoff.
Spurs Luton. Why couldn't that have been an 8 o'clock kickoff? I know they want Man United on the telly, but I'd have been more understanding if it was 5:30. But and then you had Villa Wolves at 8 o'clock. But Brentford United having to play at 8 o'clock for their fans to get down for an 8 o'clock Saturday night kickoff in a pretty remote part of London, as you will discover when we drive down, is it's really, really unacceptable. But they have to stomach it.
I'm cautious we've gone over the hour mark here, but very quickly, obviously we don't have the team news, but there's potential for Lissandro Martinez to come back into the squad this weekend. Probably too soon for him to feature Samuel from the start, but his return will be very, very welcome indeed.
Well, United will be a better team when he's back in it, and it'll be interesting to see how he's managed back into the team as well. When he came back from his metatarsal injury in January, I think he came on against Tottenham, didn't he? I don't think he started a game straight away. He was rather gently eased back in, but it worked out well in that he came on against Tottenham. Then United had their 2-week winter break, and then it was Newport away in the FA Cup, and he started that and went on to start against Wolves and West Ham, and unfortunately he got another impact injury. So I agree with you. I think if you're Ten Hag, especially where he's been away, which United okayed, and it's good for players. They say it's good for players to be away with their international colleagues and to be in that environment and to reunite with friends who speak their mother tongue, and clearly it's good for just the mindset of the player as well. But in terms of starting this weekend, I mean, maybe he'll have no choice because Harry Maguire's injured. It remains to be seen if he'll be fit. It looks like Victor Lindelof should be fit. And when he last played at centre-back, which might have been against Forest in the Cup, he actually did very well. I mean, it's a very obvious thing to say, but when Lindelof plays, it's abundantly clear that he's better at centre-back than at left-back. And that's another area that Ten Hag has to consider, whether he continues with Lindelof at left back or whether it's making the most of the two available fullbacks he's got, having started Wan-Bissaka there against Liverpool. But United have got plenty of solutions, and as I said, it's maybe the only pity for them with the Liverpool win was that they're going to have to have waited 13 days to play again, because maybe it would have been in their interest to get back into another game 3 or 4 days later and try and maintain that momentum. But hopefully, for their sake, they're able to hit the ground running for this run-in.
You just want to keep playing football, don't you, when you win football games, especially in that manner. Thank you very much for your time, Samuel.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thanks to the listeners for checking the podcast out. Just a bit of housekeeping before we go. Tyrone's got an interview with Alan Tongue, former United Academy product, that's coming out next week. And we'll be back on Tuesday, not Monday. I'll repeat that, on Tuesday, to review the Brentford game. Thank you very much and take care.